What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I'm thrilled to welcome back Luke Freeman, also known as the Arkansas Rando, to our virtual studio. Before we dive in, I want to ask why conversation craft and why yours truly? The answer lies in the podcast tagline, place we go to think out loud. YouTube is an incredible tool that has opened up doors to deep learning about topics we never imagined possible. It has become a platform where professional thinkers, scientists, divinity scholars, and master craftsmen share their knowledge. For nearly a decade, YouTube has been evolving, finally becoming a viable space for us to engage in meaningful conversations about the ideas we've been contemplating there. We've traded primetime TV for college lectures and discussions about mapping meaning, the 4 Ps of knowing, the universal state of history through fractal realities of symbolic imagery. But who can we talk about these esoteric and fascinating aspects of meaning and reality without alienating our conversation partners? Enter Paul Vanderklay's Randos Conversations and the Bridges of Meaning Discord. Enter Karen Wong's The Meaning Code, Just Chatting by Jacob Federecci, The Hunt for Meaning on Grail Country, and Grim Grizz's Broken Clock Tower Discord. Find more randos on the Friday Morning Nameless channel. And then there's the Yours Truly podcast. When I discovered this place, everything made sense. I jumped in head first, eager to join the conversation that had existed primarily in my head for 7 years. I became a participant instead of simply a consumer. And now back to Luke Freeman. Our first conversation marked the beginning of a meaningful relationship. He shared his story, engaged with mine, and today he's back, ready to explore new ideas from fresh minds, particularly those of Brendan Graham Dempsey. While some may be tired of the metamodern Christianity conversations, others are not, and I respect that. And this space is for bringing out the conversation from our minds to the out loud. And I hope to never disparage that spirit. So, without further ado, I give you the return of the Arkansas Rando, Luke Freeman. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Luke, what's up, man?
Hey, Christian. Good to see you.
You too. So we're back. We're back doing some conversation craft. It's fun because our conversation that we recorded like 2 or 3 weeks ago just aired this week. And so we're kind of fresh on that conversation now coming in to this one. Yeah, you had emailed me last week or earlier this week, or yeah, it was last week, wanting to kind of engage more with the conversation on metamodernism, metamodern Christianity, Brendan Graham Dempsey making these rounds and influencing conversation in the kind of this corner of the internet space. And I was totally down. Now, like I was telling you backstage, I didn't like have a lot to bring. I was like, well, what do you want to bounce off? What have you been what's been going on in your mind, taking in all of that information and all of those ideas, I guess.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on and being willing to continue to talk with me about the subject. I don't know. I take a long time to process, and I feel like probably a lot of people in this corner are sick and tired of hearing about metamodernism and metamodern Christianity, but it I don't know. It's been something like an obsession for me since probably, since your interview with Brendan Graham Dempsey. I think that might have been my first exposure to it. Since then, I was able to have a conversation with him that I have saved. I don't have a good place to post it and just haven't been able to post it anywhere. But I don't know, something about this topic has just really opened things up for me and been able to integrate a lot of aspects of my past, especially just integrating kind of seasons of faith I've been through, from like a naive modern slash traditionalist evangelical Christianity to kind of almost like a postmodern Christianity deconstruction, and now a return and something like a longing for tradition. I Something about the conversation around metamodernism has helped give me a framework for putting all that together. Does that make sense? And understanding it as a whole. Um, so anyway, it's been really fruitful for me, and um, I've realized even just being able to have a conversation with you, going back, listening to it after you posted it, has really helped me process a lot of my journey, where I'm at, and honestly, have more peace with where I find myself. Um,
Yeah, that's really encouraging. I've told my wife, like, I don't want to say this. I say this because I know that in my journey, I did a lot of like therapy in this exact format. Not exact as in like how I'm talking to people, but it was all online for like 4 years. And I realized that being able to there's a reality to voicing your thoughts or your ideas or your emotion, like, in a certain way and in a certain context that is therapeutic. And I would attribute that back to something way more, um, like, oh, it's not this new thing that we just figured out in the '50s. Like it's been, but there's that kind of a mentality, but like that it's a deeply human thing that we're tapping into related to that. And I told her, I think that there's in certain conversations, I think I'm helping people, but people are helping themselves in a certain way too, just by this process. So I think that's a absolute reality. And people could say, "Oh, listening back to your own conversations," it's like, "What did I say?
yeah.
Wait, what did I say?"
I'll get through a 2-hour conversation and be like, "What did I say? I can't remember."
Yeah, and so there's a certain value for even for myself or for my guests and whoever, or if you've been on Grail Country, you can go back and do the same thing. "What did I say on there?" Like, I wanna
Yeah.
okay, was that cohesive or did I get, out of line? Or I don't know. So, yeah, man, I'm with you, and as far as I don't know. What are your thoughts on why people might be tired of this and why, other the meta modern thing? Like, what do you have an idea about why for some people it may seem upsetting or, kind of like, I don't want to talk about this anymore or something.
I don't know. I don't know. I just get the vibe. I mean, in a space like this, there are trends, there are waves, and I think that's just inevitable. I mean, especially with Paul Vanderklay being something like the cornerstone.
Nexus.
He has other interests. He moves on to other topics. People stop talking about something. Um, but yeah, this has just been something that I've had to sit with. Um, and yeah, I've been following Brendan Graham Dempsey more closely and been listening to a lot of his content and other interviews he's had around the TLC, which have all been fantastic. But yeah, I anyway, it's to me, it's the feeling of realizing there's treasure here. There's treasure in this field. I need to spend some time digging. So, I really appreciate how generous you are with your time and just being willing to have me back on and uh continue to talk about this stuff and listen to me. So, thank you.
No problem. Hey, I'm gonna try something real quick. I'm gonna give us a pause. Yeah, man, that's not a problem. I am glad to. I mean, that's just part of this thing is a opportunity to continue these conversations and that's the beauty. You can not click on something, uh, but
Yeah.
um, I would also say that I join you in the fact in a very similar sentiment on why that conversation uh, was very very meaningful for me around this idea because having from my side of things been exposed to a lot of different traditions in certain ways and appreciated them been outside of it or in this kind of liminal space and then this idea of like, yeah, I've got as far there's this whole gamut of there's lots of different theologies, there's a lot of different ideas on history, there's all these things, and it's kind of the Vervaeke combinatorial explosiveness, and then you just have to be so as a Christian not thinking well, I need to ascend to, past Christianity or through Christianity, but I transcend parts of Christianity to a place where I can these all this stuff can make sense in different ways and in good places and find some peace with accepting that and then even submitting to some things that even if in certain theological or historical paradigms they don't necessarily they might be seen as regressive or that they do have purpose and I want to put them in a place in my life and kind of let go of it um so that I can operate instead of having to be in this constant churn of is did I get this right or is this wrong or I don't know if that's making sense or not but
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And one thing I felt within myself through contemplating metamodern Christianity, thinking more about my story, where I'm at, I feel much more at peace for not having found what feels like the perfect thing. This is a thing. I think we'll return to this. But I think there's something about the expansiveness of having this a meta modern frame that, at least for me, it's allowed me to be at peace with the multiplicity. Um, to see the multiplicity as good and not feeling like I have to find the right track. Does that make sense? Like the right branch. Like there's one branch that's for me, or the one true branch, and I have to find it. And if I'm not there, I'm not doing the right thing. Does that make sense? So
yeah
it on a very psychological level,
yes
it's made me okay with a lot more of the diversity, the plurality, without letting go of some kind of higher truth structure. You know.
mhm. and and that there's also a practical reality that oh well say I come to some conclusion that I think this is more right or more correct or right but like and then but it doesn't actually when I look around in the world that I'm in it might actually not make sense for me to pursue that to its entirety because there are other parts of my life that are also true and that are also right that right now it makes sense for them to be settled in a way and I think there's a I don't know what if there is an impulse and I don't know what to attribute it to being like well I want to be well if I believe this about the history of the church something like that then I must be in this place or else my life doesn't make sense and
Yeah.
and I think that I mean and I people get you've expressed deep anxieties about that I think to a degree and that being able to transcend that for a time and find it to be okay and and let other things be okay right now. You don't have to let go of that. It's just it's not it's about helping me prioritize value with that. Not that um it's not important, but the impulse that where I worship maybe or is it has to be the right conclusion for it to always make sense for every moment of your life in our culture in our world and how fractured and fragmented it is. It actually might not right now or so. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And that just makes me think of that idea of a value hierarchy being really integral in conceptualizing metamodernity, metamodern Christianity. I want to get to that. I kind of have a few things I want to talk about.
Let's do
So
it.
if you don't mind,
Yeah.
the first thing is just for me, I'm a very visual person, and I have a few like mind images that I want to run by you. How I've
Yeah.
been thinking about modernity and just get your thoughts on it. Um,
I'm gonna
so
light this candle, by the way.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, so I think two images came to mind through these discussions is so one is a tree with the meta modern perspective being something like seeing the whole tree with its multiplicity of branches um but it there being a whole, and within that whole you can see individual parts and it's ordered, but within that whole there's a multiplicity. And I think of tradition being something like the main trunk, where from a traditional perspective it's binary. It's you're in it or out, you're out. You're
Apart or
in Christendom, you're either like Christian, which, I mean, we call that Catholic now, but at the time it was you're you're in the church, you're out of the church, right? So it's a binary, uh, which led to a splitting. I don't know if that would be modernity. I think of something like the Protestant Reformation, where you have a splitting of that trunk into multiple branches. Okay. And then within that, you have an arguing about which branch is the right branch. We're the one true branch, or who traces their lineage back to the rootstock, you know, apostolic succession, whatever. Um, we're the one true church. Um, Postmodernity is something like seeing that multiplicity of branches and calling it out and saying, how dare you say you're the one true branch when there are all these other branches? So how can you say there's a correct branch? Uh, because postmodernity doesn't necessarily have a way to see the whole. They just see the multiplicity, and in that multiplicity it's almost impossible to choose. And to me, meta modernity gives me a framework for seeing the whole, seeing the branches, seeing the trunk, being situated on a branch, understanding why I'm situated on that branch, a lot of it being my family of origin, um, their family of origin, ethnicity, geographic location, a situatedness. I am situated in time space. Despite there being a plurality of Christian belief, I find myself situated here. I can see the whole, I can see the multiplicity, but also I can understand my own situatedness, and I can hold both. Does that make sense? By
yeah,
seeing the whole.
yes,
That's one way I've been thinking about meta a meta modern perspective. Does that track?
yeah. I mean, I think I totally agree. My question was, what's the root? Um, and which I think, I mean, maybe we would agree on something like God, or God, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and so, um, and then I think it's also cool because you're, by training, well, you're a farmer, and
Yeah.
so that I think that's a beautiful, uh, connection that for that illustration for you as a person, and
Oh,
then
out of the stump of Jesse.
what was that?
Out of the stump of Jesse.
Well, that too, and And then the third piece was which I think is also important in that I think if I would probably play the Brendan Graham Dempsey role would being, well, what about these other trees? E and so
You just took it to another level.
and and having to contend with that and finding peace in that as well. But I think that being like, well,
Yeah.
I think that it's maybe it makes sense to tear your little branch off and graft it onto another tree. Um, Buddhism, blah, blah, blah. But there you gotta recognize there's a lot of trauma and that you aren't originally part of this and you're never gonna be completely, you know, home here because of that in a way. And now we could keep extrapolating that thing, but that's where I think also culturally, that this Western or American idea of all of that is arbitrary. What branch you were on, that we're just complete like, you can just go graft yourself in or go get a job, 100 miles away from where you were raised or, 100,000 miles away from where you were raised. And it doesn't matter because all of this is just arbitrary. And that's another piece that I think it's like, no, that is an oak tree and you're a maple or something. Like, it's not arbitrary. Um, Now we can we're not trees. We can do these, we can go and stake out on an adventure, but I just to the point of the illustration though, I think that um I just agree, and being able to accept those things about, and not even be ashamed about certain parts of it in a certain way too, I think is important. So those are some.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, I wanted to mention last night when I was up late wallpapering the boys' new bedroom, and I was able to catch your interview with Graham Pardoon, which I'm like just with what you said about situatedness being rooted. That was a theme that really stuck out to me from that conversation, which it was a fantastic conversation. I think really really important to add to this space. But I I agree. I'm I'm totally tracking with you, Christian. And I really love how you even took it out another perspective, and it's not just a single tree. There could be a forest. Um and so then, and I think this is where things really get meta. Um because I think the Christian impulse is to say, this is the one true tree, that's growing out of the stump of Jesse. What do you do with the other trees, and from what soil do they spring forth? And I don't necessarily have much more to say about that, but
Yeah.
I do feel like this kind of the metamodern spirituality conversation is taking it in that direction, and it's just something to be wrestling with.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where that was my pushback to Brendan was like, so is the only true path, if that is the only true path forward for everybody, then I have to wait on you to figure it out, and I just exist until the meta modern spirituality people get it figured out, which I'm not dogging on him because I think Brendan's brilliant. So but
Yeah.
my point is like, so instead of accepting certain realities of my life in the world, in the embodied place that I exist, and then go and participate in my church, in my family, in my community, and have my religion and my religious practice be rooted deeply into my living experience. Um, but dude, Christian, you're missing it because look at all these other trees, and it's like, so comes, and I'm like, I don't, like you said, I don't have much to say. Like, I think I join you in that and saying that, and part of that is because of um other personal experiences that say, however, I liked how you said that their project, you're not invalidating their project at the same time. Like, follow that drive, that impulse that's going on, but um our meaning and our beliefs and our truth, is it's going to be settled here until God does otherwise or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah. And just to go back to that theme you were talking about kind of situatedness and time and place. This has been a huge part of my story and my meaning making. Um and I feel like it's very relevant. And so anyway, to connect it to the horticultural metaphor, um you can graft certain apple varieties on other apple varieties. You might even be able to graft say like a pear on an apple. Okay, they're the same family. But um you couldn't graft let's say a peach on an apple. Okay. So there are ways in which the okay, let's just say biologically the genetics matter, And what are genetics? Genetics are a lineage um, in natural history. Okay. So on the human level, that matters too. Um, where, for me, um, being born and raised in Arkansas, family in Arkansas, family in Texas, both sides of family being mostly from like England, Scotland, that matters. Like it actually does really matter. Um, and yeah, there are probably some aspects of say, Buddhism I could learn from. But for me to really like say drop into to India and be a Buddhist, no. No, I couldn't do that. I just couldn't. Just dispositionally. I could not. I would
Well,
not thrive.
it
Uh
there's realities to that because we're kind of told it's almost implied that we can, or even that it's a virtue too, um, in a certain way, I think. And, you can obviously, and part of that probably is related to, say, World War II to a degree that to the when you take some of that those ideas in a certain direction, it creates deep problems. But to the point of what matters, I'll take it this way. My dad was adopted from Korea. Um, he's half Korean, and he's a was a result of the Korean conflict that uh, the South Korea was subsidizing American troops with booze, gambling, and prostitution, and so there were a lot of half Korean babies being born that the government didn't want anything to do with. So there was Christian missionaries that were coming over to the States to encourage families to adopt back in the 60s. So there's actually a lot of half American Korean adoptees that are all around 60, between 60 and 70. And my dad was adopted to a rural town in Arkansas. He still lives in the house he was raised in. Town of 300 people. Um, but he didn't look like the rest of the world. And he was born into a traumatic existence, malnourished and all these things. And um, and I would say that physiologically, like I inherited that story, that trauma in that story. So that's one thing. And then I've had to learn how to either start healing from some of that as a person and as a human and for my family. And two is uh, he did a 23andMe recently, which he never thought he would ever know what his heritage was. Like, 10 years ago, he didn't think he could even know what made him half, and it was Irish and Belgium.
hmm, okay.
So we might even have some but so that's interesting. But then the third point I wanted to make was related to the generational trauma in the African American community, that's also uh deep in the genes, I think. The story is deep in the genes. And then I didn't think I had one other point, but that was I would even say that most American immigrants, like your family included, were people that maybe had little to lose, or they did have an adventurous spirit that was a real part of their makeup. They left their country of origin for a better world. And as a result, we kind of get this American partially an American ethos that does think go and create a new world for yourself. So those were the things that were all coming out of that point of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. And I think the move is to find meaning in that situatedness, and just to make it tangible in my life again is um I'm living in the town I grew up in. I've got one brother who moved back here after college. We'll see where he goes. But it was a very different move and kind of unexpected for my parents. All the time my parents will say, "Oh, like we're pleasantly surprised that you are living here." And I think what I've seen is my parents being in, the boomer generation were very much like unrooted. Um to me, the baby boomers, they were a generation of loosening. Like if you think of tying and loosing, they were loosening the bonds. Freedom is really big, freedom of movement, and so that was a really big value for them. And like my dad ended up working here at the university. He became the director of the Office of International Students. So for him, that international exposure to the different, exposure to the new, he got to travel a lot. That was really important to him. Um, for me, it's been a process of growing roots where I found myself, um, and finding the meaning in my own history, um, both genealogically, but also just kind of the deep Christian tradition, um, and that giving me a sense of situatedness, um, and we'll see what our boys do. I feel like with generations, it kind of swings back and forth, right? But my wife and I, we're not moving from Northwest Arkansas. We freaking love it here, and it's this very paradoxical thing where this is like I literally think this is the best place in the world to live, but not for everybody. You know what I mean? Like it can be both things at the same time. Where for me and my family, this is absolutely the best place in the world. I couldn't imagine living somewhere better. Uh, but someone might say the same thing of uh, Nashville or you know Minneapolis, whatever. Um, so I think to me that very much speaks to what we're discussing, where um, it's that move like past postmodernism, you know, where it's this is the best place for me, and someone else can have another place that's best for them. And I think a lot of I'm going to connect this to like kind of TLC stuff. I was thinking a lot about where oh, remember when Chad got upset about people talking about orthodoxy all the time? I I I've been thinking about it in terms of someone just bragging about their hometown all the damn time, and you're like, okay, I get it. You've got a great hometown. I'm sorry, I'm not moving there. Like, I love that you love your hometown. That's awesome. That's awesome for you. I'm sure it's a great place. I'll visit it sometime. Okay. Okay. Can we move on and talk about other stuff? Because I'm not gonna live there, you know? And my hometown's great too, but I don't talk about it all the time, you know? I feel like it's a similar kind of thing. It's a balance where you don't want to negate the value of someone else's situatedness. You respect it. Um, but there's a way of talking about it where people can almost be like, "Oh, well, this is like the best in the world, so you have to move here. Like you have to be here because this is just the best," you know? And it just that gets a little annoying.
Hmm.
Does that track?
Yeah, I think I've probably tried to because I don't know if it hasn't annoyed me, and I was kind of wondering why because I'm not Orthodox.
Yeah, no, and I'm not
Well,
really triggered by it,
well,
but I was just thinking why someone would be.
I think because I think maybe here's my perspective on it. My perspective is that do you need something?
No, I heard you clearing your throat in a way that made me think you.
Oh, sorry. My wife heard me clearing my throat. She thought I was choking to death. So
No,
she's checking on me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
She
So
loves you.
I'm alive. Yeah, and I actually like turned my mic down whenever I was really like trying to hawk
Oh.
on. Um, so the point on with that, my perspective on the Orthodox thing is simply this: in this space, in the TLC, that people can be like, oh well, this is, I didn't really come to this space from this place. So, or I didn't really come in from Peugeot, or I didn't really, that's fine. But those guys are the biggest influencers regardless. And even Peterson's wearing Orthodox iconography on his jacket. And so like, I think there's a certain acceptance that you have that if say most of these people, whether they were get raised culturally Christian and then became a nun or a new atheist or something like that, and then come into this space excited about this new home that they found, that it's kind of inevitable to me. Like it just sociologically makes sense it's like, what's this phenomenon? I can't believe these people are coming around doors. I'm like, it's all on YouTube. YouTube's the phenomenon. It's even Jordan Peterson is a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon. And this is, and so it's like, so I just kind of like take it for face work. And I'm glad that people are excited because I'm actually having a conversation with a guy named, he's on Girl Country. He's been on Paul's, Jeremy Firth. He's an Orthodox guy, but his story is that he came, I'm talking to him tomorrow. He came out of Mormonism and then into New Atheism and now into
Right.
now
He's
into
the welder, isn't he?
Yes. And I think
Yeah.
that's just kind of my point of, I have found something and it's Christian. And I even maybe think, like you said, it's like the right kind of Christianity, but I kind of take it with a grain of salt, kind of like because of Graham's story, is that the excitement that people have had being a part of something 1 or 2 or 3 years or even 5 years is not the same thing of existing in that space for decades plus. Um and the new and the shiny wears off of everything and then it becomes life. And so that's why it doesn't bother me because I just, people are excited. They're going to talk about what they're excited about. I probably talk about what I'm excited about, and um but but at the same time there is also like I think a sense of when people when there's multiple people talking about it and you're not in that, then that becomes kind of exclusive in its very nature. And it's like, and why are there not people talking about how great Lutheranism is or something, which is what Luke said related to Chad. And um, I think those are good questions, but to me, that actually has way more to do with a big, broader cultural perspective on the United States. That actually, the too based for my taste, but I like some of his stuff. Redeemed Zoomer, yeah, I'm memeing that into existence. They did a hashtag the other night when I used that, but the Redeemed Zoomer guys. It's because Protestantism is on a type of life support in America. And so I think that, yeah, people aren't talking how excited they are about Protestantism because by and large, Protestantism has a lot of problems that the more historical trad movements don't. I don't think it's going to die, but I think that that the Redeemed Zoomer guy's pointing at something, even though I think his prescription's slightly naive, but he's 20. That's fine. Were we all more naive when we were 20?
Yeah.
And but I think what he's pointing at is true, and that's actually something that I'm interested in. Is Protestantism in America as a whole, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my feelings on that stuff, and no one's probably going to be talking about how cool Protestantism is for a while. It's kind of except for this 20-year-old. But that maybe
we're the old wife, we're not. Yeah, we're the old wife. Just, the old maid, still there. Had a bunch of kids, been faithful the whole time, but
well,
not the hot 20-year-old.
yeah, which is funny because it's the oldest thing in the room that we're calling the hot 20-year-old. So, yeah,
But you know what I mean. Like it's new and fresh. It's new and
Mhm.
fresh to America. Yeah.
Mhm.
The old becomes new, the new becomes old. I mean, one thing I really I wish I knew how to make graphics better, but I have this mental image that maybe I don't know. Maybe someone will create it. But imagine a white background with a black cross, and then the background goes black and the cross disappears, then the cross turns white and shows up. Then the background goes white and the cross disappears. Then the cross turns black and shows up. The background turns black and the cross disappears. I've been thinking a lot about that. Can you visualize that?
Yeah,
It's like this object appearing and disappearing because of a contrast to the background. And when the background changes, it almost like catches up to the color of the cross, the object. The cross disappears. It's still there. You can't see it. Okay. So then the cross changes color. The background adjusts. To me, that's we're in this cycle. I mean, that's just a cycle that I see.
did you listen to Paul talk to local distance?
Yeah. I think that was kind of in the back of my mind.
Yeah, the
When I
network
thought
in the
about that.
background, the network. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like how you imaged that into Christianity. I guess you could say like you brought, but that the network and the background, like the that image is more defined when the background is more contrasted.
Yeah. And I think to me that makes a lot of sense.
What would
For
you?
example,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
myself coming from an evangelical background, finding a lot in Catholic tradition that for me illuminates who Christ is. It illuminates the spiritual life for me. But then I have conversations with, I mean, just yesterday I was in a long car ride for work with a guy who grew up in Iowa and grew up Catholic, and he says, I could never be Catholic. He's like, they're a bunch of phonies. They're just all judgy. He's like, the nuns are mean. The priests are bad people. And he would not see Christ by going to a Catholic church. He would probably be able to see Christ in maybe even a non-denominational context. I mean, definitely more low church, I think would
Yeah.
allow him to see it. And it's
100%.
just it's all the contrast, you know.
100%, man. And that was that section when we talked about like my wife's family history related to that. Like my mother-in-law would have said the same thing 20 years ago about Catholicism. And yet there's still a part of her where that's still a part of home. To take it back to the lineage thing, and even in recent conversations, that there's an aspect of it that because it's still the background, it's
still there.
It's still that because if evangelicalism was the contrast to that background for the network or however the illustration goes, it doesn't mean the other one disappears. It just means that it's still all part of the whole, and it's in and I agree with you because you and I are both having that background, and one of the reasons you reached out to me was because when you're looking at this otherness, that contrast where you're coming from, it's like, oh, but really it's something about them together ultimately, like like we're talking about. And yeah, because it's almost like if you go to try to become all the way, or if you okay, yeah, so if you try to make them come together, then you kind of lose sight. You're saying that no, the background is the truth, or you're saying no, this thing, like the one thing is the truth, but you actually need both of them to have a more clear picture. And I like that kind of thinking because that's been my experience being in the non-denominational interdenominational space, when having the people that were coming through that would have these other backgrounds, that I think it was operating more like what you're talking about. Instead of trading one background for another background, it was kind of like they could still hold on to that. And that's why I think that's also the interesting part of that. I was a part of a church that allowed for all Trinitarian baptisms to come in, is that you didn't there wasn't a sense of abandoning the background. You were actually bringing it with you. Whereas that if you're going to say that that's nullified psychologically, then no, okay, now I've got a completely different background, you know.
Yeah.
Something to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You articulate it so well. It's the contrast exists because there is a background. And so there is something about the bringing together of these two different perspectives that, I mean, it's like a 3D image. You know, you put on the 3D glasses, it works because you have several different colors that are coming together to make something three-dimensional. And there really is something about that. It's like a superposition, which I think is, to me, it makes me understand the moment we're in. This is the moment we're in. There's no going back to some kind of naive traditionalism. Like, as much as I have fantasized about, um, back in the day where everyone was in the same, traditional parish. There was just one church and it was the center of town and everyone, was just in community together. Like, we can't do that. It's naive. Um, and I think there is something that's missing from that, what we don't really talk about, which is there's not as much self-understanding in that context because you don't have another dimension, uh, or another position from which to observe where you're at. Does that make sense? And I think that's where we're at, especially in a context like the TLC where we're seeing different perspectives. It allows you to kind of get out of your shoes, put yourself in someone else's shoes, see yourself from their vantage point and understand yourself better. And it can be like a disembodied experience. As long as one stays situated, I think it can allow oneself just better self-understanding. Um, or even just to see the beauty of one's own path and one's own history, because there is something like a contrast. There's another perspective to mm, see it, like another vantage point to see it from.
Well,
Um,
there literally is, or there actually is, because just like we were talking about earlier, being able to look at the conversation that you just had, disembodied from yourself.
yeah,
I mean, we've been all doing that on social media to an extent, but in this, you're kind of like you're evaluating an embodied, a digitally embodied conversation that you just had. You can, I did this today. I was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, I'm listening back to what I said on Grail Country on Luke's stream." She's like, "Okay," and
you narcissist.
well, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's truth to that. Hopefully, and I think to try to pretend like that's not at play in certain ways in this space, you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, no, and I was making a joke. I
Yeah.
think there's a way to do that that's not
Yeah. But the other, so
understanding. Uh,
there are two other pieces to that, which was the hearkening back to that traditional thing. I would say that the idealism is, yeah, we can't go back, but what does it look like to go forward with that as a value?
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
so. And that's it. Does it mean like, oh, I need to go drive 2 hours to an Orthodox church because that's where it's no, no, no. I disagree with that. Now there are people that do it, and I'm not uh, saying you're wrong for doing that because again, everyone's got their perspective and their vantage point that I can't see. However, for what I'm understanding and seeing where I'm at and the few relationships that I've had that are kind of like that impulse is like, well, how can we take baby steps towards that so that you're not just ripping off the graft or something. You're like, well, can we make this branch more healthy that we're on? To go back to that, and is there nutrients, or as you've said in our previous conversation, treasures from that tradition, that main tradition, that we can try to hold our tradition to their, if it's within this tradition, can we elevate these, well, how people talk about America not living up to its ideals, with slavery and women and all those things. Like, well, it's like, can we call our historical branch that we're on to live up to its confessions that they may be like, we want to be evangelical, we want to do what the evangelicals are doing. Like, well, what about the things that you are, that that do make you distinct from that, like we were talking about, and encouraging that. So that's kind of where I feel about that. And what was the last thing you talked more about on that thread uh, that we were just on? We talked about seeing yourself, talked about um, hearkening back, and I don't remember.
Contrast, multiple perspectives.
Yeah. I don't know.
It'll
It's
come
kinda
back. It'll
maybe.
come back. Yeah, this okay. I want to get back on this traditional topic. But yeah, one more thing, just painting out the picture, because I think I'm really enjoying talking with you, because I feel like you've really been conceptualizing metamodernity and metamodern Christian. One thing I really want to spend some time talking about is that idea that you've talked about of a value hierarchy. Because to me, the thing that metamodernity is doing, it's creating some kind of a framework or a container that holds containers, the container of containers. Um, w- I, I guess I'm just interested in you expounding on this. How are you conceptualizing, like, for metamodern Christianity? What is that the biggest container? Does that make sense? That that contains the containers. Or you could even say, like, what is the character of the whole tree? Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, how am I conceptualizing that?
Yeah, I feel like you have, even just how you talked about a value hierarchy. Maybe that's how you would describe it. But it's even
Like on
something like,
like a
what is
practical,
the
like practically?
yeah? I mean, it's almost like, what is the, if you were to like characterize that? Do you see? Because I think there is something where I mean, just to apply it to the TLC, you have multiple people from multiple denominational backgrounds having conversations together. So they have different values, different truth claims, but there is some broader container that is contains values. Everyone is, for the most part, operating within those. If someone is not, it's very clear. They'll get called out. Eh, someone won't get called out for you know being a Unitarian, but someone would get called out for other things.
Or like the rub, like for T. Grogan being a material physicalist, like that creates a type of impasse within the conversation.
Yes, yeah. So I see that as there is almost like there's a meta layer happening,
Okay.
like a spirit, right?
Yeah.
And I think so with metamodern Christianity, it begs the question, like, kind of what is that spirit of metamodern Christianity?
I think that because it was my father-in-law, he asked, well, he's listened to, along to a lot of the conversations, most of them actually, at least of these. And he's watched some Paul now and other things. And I would say, well, he was like, what is your and he loves studying confessionalism and theology and um, was it's important to him if he's going to say I'm going to be a part of this, and he's going to say I need to believe what I'm being a part of. And I have a lot of respect for that. So, but to your point, he asked me, what is the orientating principle? And I said, I mean, I thought about it. I think it's God. Like, and I'm not invoking Jesus, even though I, as a Christian, a Trinitarian Christian, can say Jesus is God. But for the container for this, for the TLC, I think is God. And I think that somebody like T. Grogan comes up to the container is tapping all over the container. Like if you're looking at like when you said that image, I thought about like these plastic things you might put in your pantry that have a lot of different drawers and different size drawers, but the whole thing is a container and you've got these different drawers, but the whole thing's also transparent. The drawers, and that we've lived in so I'm, there's the Catholic drawer is pretty big. The Orthodox drawer is pretty big. Well, in history, it's pretty big. It's not big in America. It depends on where you're at, but if the American drawer, there's some drawers inside that, then orthodoxy would be, or there's containers inside that, orthodoxy would be small. But the whole thing is now transparent. And that's what I was saying about the wall. Digital has eaten the walls of the church. So you can literally look over and be like, oh, there's Cale Zeldin in the Catholic Church, and he likes trad Catholic stuff. And oh, look, there's Paul as a Calvinist, and that whole Calvinist world. And then you can look over at, I had a conversation that'll come out this week, is a guy who went to Princeton, and he's been Presbyterian his whole life, and he's now at a Baptist church. And that was an incredible conversation. And then, you know, so conceptualizing that idea of the container is that the walls are, at least if they're there and we acknowledge them, but you can see straight through them. Where used to, that wasn't the case. As the digital has dissolved that. And then, and to that point, yeah, the Trinitarian or the Unitarian drawer is pretty small, but it's actually like a part of this. If God is the container, and in this kind of like Western view of God, really is, you know, because then there's also people that are Jewish, Orthodox Jews, and Jews that are that I think still, it seems like, and I'm interested to have more conversation about this, but feel like they're within the God container with people in this space. So that would be one conceptualization. I think the other one, on a more pragmatic level, is, well, what do you do with apostolic succession, and what do you do with the saints, and what do you do with tradition, and what do you do with Theotokos and Mariology, and what do you do, like, what do you do with Unitarianism? And so then that would be like, okay, well, within the God container, the way that I conceptualize it is in a value hierarchy within, for me, and my box inside of it, my personal or my family box or something, is now it becomes more psychological, not theological, because the whole thing is theology. But how I orient inside of it is where I am coming to conceptually with worship, because so much of the conversation that, like, you're having, or, oh, I've got to go find the right place to worship, the right confession to worship, the right, and like, okay, what is it though? Because those are ideas, but then you come into your life and you're doing these practices. And I think the reason that this feels clear to me is because I was a practitioner. I was a liturgist practitioner. Even if that meant rock and roll, that's still what I did. Like, that's what I know better than almost anything. Even though I've been out of it, but because it was what I went to work thinking about, for whether I was going. It's where I chose to go to college was based off of that. And then who was practicing that thing the best, that I could get into a network where people were practicing that thing, even if there wasn't a program for it. And so, yes. So, and that's, and evaluating that from a meta sense of like, well, what was, when I was out of, once it all broke down and I was out of it, and all I could do was just look at it. Actually, on a Sunday morning, I'm like looking at this thing that's, I'm no longer a part of. I look at it and I evaluate it, but I don't, and I exist in it, participate in it, but I'm not the one cultivating it. Jordan Peterson, because he's the one that a lot of the ideas of the value hierarchy come from, at least in this space. I'm sure he would cite other people, but as I've looked at things like the idea or the belief of transubstantiation and everything within that, really, I would say just more sacramental, historical sacramentalism. Now, you can get there, the theology makes it technical, but at the end of the day, it defines psychologically how you treat that aspect of worship. It might not affect everybody psychologically. Some people are like, just, but if you're treating this as worship, that affects. And then the opposite is also true. If nothing has actual spiritual reality in a in anything, if nothing physical has actual spiritual reality, that affects you psychologically. And,
Yeah.
and so, and that's more of the world that I existed in. And I married into a world where that was not the case. I married into a sacramental reality family. And whether or not they could articulate all of that stuff, there's psychological differences about worship. And so when I'm thinking about something like, is apostolic succession real? Or is my church, is it an unbroken, that this church is the church that has the unbroken line to Peter? If you believe that, that will affect how you think about this church being right. Is it, has that historically been the case? Who the hell knows? But we have to, so regardless, regardless, what does the idea of apostolic succession do to you psychologically? It positions you in a state of humility, spiritual humility. Now, are there abuses? And did the Reformation fix those abuses? Yes, it did. It sure did. Okay. So when I think about that, even in a Presbyterian context, you could trace the ideas of John Knox, from the church fathers, and Calvin being a part of the like, you could play all sorts of games to make it work for you, or for myself to say, I believe there's some kind of spiritual reality to the existence of the Presbyterian church that could trace its history back to Rome, and Rome traces, and the bishops of Christendom before uh the schism. Okay, so I want to participate in worship as if it is in that lineage, and I want to then participate in how I orient myself in worship psychologically about what might be, if I believe in a sacramental reality, that, and I'm not there right now, but that's what I'm taking baby steps towards, because I was a charismatic and a Baptist. And I don't, and by baby steps, maybe, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations about this through a long time as a person that did theological studies and worked in a church. But what I kind of, I guess, is saying then is that wherever you would choose to go to participate, it's this modern idea that I need to be able to say that the Orthodox or this Lutheran church or this Catholic church I've come to believe that. What you're doing is, by the belief, it allows you to participate in treating the sacrament a certain way. And that's what I think is important in worship. And then, regardless of what we believe about what happens in that time, and I'm not being able to pull in right now the ideas about the difference between a non-technical and non-theological sacramentalism, which is something like the Baptist, Anabaptist realities of Christendom, and that the participating in worship, that doing that, if you're not acknowledging that there's a sacramental nature to a worship leader and to the sermon, and then to the invitation, which calls you forth to come to kneel down to something, that is you're treating that as a sacrament, and the act of going and doing that, and it also is, but it doesn't ever get to the real of real, which would be placing something real in between your teeth, or partaking it into your stomach. That is connecting the real to the real. There's always disconnect. And I was having this conversation. You unlocked this can of worms. I don't know if you were.
I love it. I love it.
I was having this thought. I don't know if I said conversation with myself. When I was thinking about practitioners like myself or like a preacher that in I people that are involved in someone like McMo, who I had a long conversation with about worship, as being on the tech side of the execution of the Baptist sacrament of worship music, the people that are administering that, like himself as the soundboard or the computer, or the people on stage that are playing the music, or the person preaching, that they are touching a physical reality of that sacrament, or they're that they're more psychologically, spiritually connected to the sacrament. That we would say something like a priest is those administering is more spiritually connected to this sacrament. Um, and so I just think that a lot of these things are psychological, but just because the meta move is the postmodern move is to say that it's all bullshit. But I'm saying, hell no. I think that fundamentally that the religious participation and the religious desire and the religious activity and the is foundational and fundamental to the human. And so it's the complete opposite of bullshit. It's the most deep reality. It's just that how we orient ourselves and the way we give our attention does things psychologically for us as a human. And I'm coming to a place where I believe that approaching worship with a sacramental reality does things different than not. And then the ones that aren't actually not doing it. They just don't call it that, and that it comes up to a physical limit. So
That was awesome. Yeah.
I guess.
That was amazing. And this is so unfortunate, but my boys just woke up.
Okay.
They're running around their bedroom. But just a final thing. Gosh, we'll have to have another conversation,
We
Christian.
will, man.
And man, gosh, the thing that I just kept thinking about when you were talking was the meeting of heaven and earth. I mean, you're talking about the sacrament being the physical, the object, and the idea, the intention coming to meet that is the union. That's just how I was imagining it. I don't know if that
and I would
connects
say
with what you're
that's
saying.
the desire with music worship but that it doesn't take that final step. And that's why I think that I see that psychologically being important. Not to say that music worship is not valuable or not part of the hierarchy, but it is. But that is the desire, and that's why even like in the charismatic movement, it's like, okay, and then whenever the person receives the Holy Spirit and speaks in tongues, now we have a physical manifestation and a physical reality of heaven meeting earth. So, anyways, man, dude, yeah, thanks for shooting me back a message and saying you wanted to connect again and helping me, honestly, like draw these things out and for me and within this space. So, dude, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say before we kind of close this thing down.
No, I gotta go. My 3-year-olds are being crazy in their bedroom.
All right, man.
And I'm the only one home. But no, this was awesome. Yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation because I mean, just two other things I was hoping to talk about was discussing this in the context of cycles of history, and then talking about the relationship between metamodernism and tradition. But to be continued, hopefully.
Yeah, man. Part 3. All right, guys. Stick around and we'll end this thing backstage. Hey, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us till the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection is deeply meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed our conversation and believe that these conversations bring real value to your life and in this space, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you'll be helping me reach the goal of 500 subscribers, where we can continue building a TLC, this little corner of the internet sub-community. My hope is to be able to further cultivate digital community on this channel, to be a space where kindred souls can engage in deeper, more intimate discussions and allow space for more private, monthly, yours truly, small group conversations. In the future, I hope to expand this endeavor by taking yours truly out on the road to do some conversation craft, to have meaningful, embodied dialogues with individuals from various corners of the corner. Together, let's continue to build spaces that further foster connection, growth, and understanding around deeply meaningful realities. Thank you again for being part of this journey. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.